Hello, hello.
Welcome to Ross and Jono. And what we will do is let people give a little bit of time for people to join. And while we're waiting for people to join, and as you join, by the way, send us a message. We would love to see that you are listening and watching, and we love to read your messages, interact with you in real time. So while we're waiting for people to do that, let me just remind everyone: still number one, still number one
I
on
tell you,
Amazon.
it's been tough. It's been tough, Jono. We've had people come and sometimes it's at the top, sometimes it gets bumped out by.
There it
Here's what
is.
I don't understand. This book has more than 1,000 words. These are the words, and a book that's called 15 words is bumping out
Yeah.
1,000 words. The math doesn't even work. I mean, how
No,
is
but you're
that?
back on top, I think. Aren't you back on top? Who have we got? Timothy Thompson. G'day, mate.
Hey, Timothy,
We're
how's
just
it going?
saying Ross's the latest Hebrew vocabulary book, which is my favourite, and it really is doing well. It's still number one in new releases on Amazon. If you haven't got a copy yet, boys and girls, make sure that you get one. And what else is news? Ross, what's the latest with Florida, by the way?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I had that in my notes. It's really it's early in this thing. I mean, it seems that there's a lot of devastation. As someone who has lived through these, living on the Gulf Coast, whenever these storms hit, you have the utter devastation. Unfortunately, at times we have loss of life and destruction of property. But even in addition to that, what's really bad, I mean, that's horrible, but what's also bad, I should say, is that there's so much infrastructure that's destroyed. Not only do you have flooding
Mm.
and property that's destroyed, but you also have weeks sometimes without electricity. I personally, in Louisiana, we've been without electricity for weeks at a time, and they're trying. I mean, local neighboring states send all their people in to help. So we
Mm.
just wanted to bring that up at the beginning and tell people that the people of Florida are in our thoughts and prayers. And Jono, this storm is expected potentially to regain strength in the Gulf and maybe come back on shore. God forbid. So we don't know what it's going to
Really?
do. I don't. I
Oh,
haven't.
wow.
Yeah. So
Okay,
it's
I didn't
on the
know that that
East
was a
Coast. Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah. It came. It
I
went
thought it was
across.
heading. Yeah, I wondered if it was going to be heading up. Timothy, is Timothy in Carolina? Do I remember
Timothy's in North
correctly?
Carolina. That's right. Yeah.
In North Carolina, okay, it's a
Yep.
little bit further up. Hey, g'day to Dave and Patty Tyler, fellow Shapiriologists.
Yep.
G'day,
Hey.
love to have
Hey.
you guys
Hey,
here.
Tyler's. Yep.
Hey, yeah, so yeah, it's a horrible situation.
So
The
we'll
Gulf's
keep
got
our eyes
today
on it,
to.
and there are a lot of agencies that are there to help. And of course, we're always pleased in Louisiana. Our own folks, the Cajun Navy, as they're called, just a group of people who are really dedicated. Load up, bring their personal boats, their equipment, and they've weathered so many of these storms that they've
Hmm.
become a trusted part of the recovery effort. So I saw today that they were staged and ready to go. So
Wow.
that's pleasing. So many people pull themselves together and help each other during these times. So we just
Yeah,
pray
yeah.
that it's minimal in loss of life, and as an experienced person in these storms, the power eventually comes back on. So it's tough.
All right. Serious stuff. All right. So I was thinking, if it's okay, I might just give a recap on where we left off last week. Is that okay? And then we'll launch into what we're going to talk about this week.
Yeah, that's fine. Now, look, this week, have you given any thought to maybe the two of us, if we could do something that's just not challenging at all, just something that everybody can agree with? Is that something that's not in your notes or anything?
No, that's
Okay.
no fun at all.
All right.
Um,
How many of the
so
woke are there helping?
yeah,
Says
I
Dave
was just
Tyler.
reading Dave's comment in all capitals.
I hope that everyone is there helping.
Everyone's
Hopefully,
helping each other.
we'll see.
Hopefully, that's right. All right. So last week we presented the solution found in the Moses Scroll as to the problem of the apparent divine endorsement of transgenerational or vicarious punishment, particularly as proposed within the caveat attached to the prohibition against idolatry, the first commandment in both Exodus and Deuteronomy. And we pointed out, Ross, that this particular caveat is in fact attached to the seventh word or the seventh commandment in the Decalogue of the Moses scroll, and it reads as following: "You shall not lift my name to deceive, for I will avenge the iniquity, fathers unto sons, unto grandsons, and unto great-grandsons, for lifting my name to deceive. Anochi Elohim Elohecha." Here, the phrase fathers unto sons, unto great-grandsons, and unto grandsons and unto great-grandsons doesn't pertain to the target of Elohim's avengement, but rather is descriptive of the iniquity. And God says that, Elohim says that if you are deceiving impressionable youth and you're using my name to give it a kosher stamp, so to speak, he says he will surely avenge that iniquity. So this, of course, raises the question as to whether or not this has occurred. If falsehoods have been added to the scroll of the Torah of Moses with the name of Elohim attached. The verse in question is an excellent example. And as we discussed last week, the proposal that God punishes the descendants for a father's idolatry is directly countered in Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, and in considerable detail in Ezekiel chapter 18. How prolific is, as Jeremiah puts it, the false pen of the scribes? And to get a picture of the enormity of this particular iniquity, we pointed out that the Moses scroll does not necessitate a priesthood. It doesn't necessitate a temple. It doesn't necessitate animal sacrifices, nor does it necessitate a monarchy. Furthermore, we highlighted the Tanakh itself, you really drove this home, objects to these institutions in various passages. So then, Ross, the question becomes, what are we to do? How are we to approach questionable observances that infringe upon this particular commandment, raising the name to deceive, if in fact that's what's happening? So, as I mentioned last week, the Karaites provide a perfect example. The Karaites don't observe Hanukkah, right, as divinely ordained holy day on their calendar. And the reason for this is that Karaites reject rabbinic authority to create laws and holidays. Moreover, they rightfully refuse to invoke the name of God, giving the holiday a kosher stamp, as it were. So in the prayer in lighting the menorah during Hanukkah, the prayer says, "Blessed are you, Adonai Eloheinu, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to kindle the Hanukkah lamp." And there is no such commandment. But so this would be an example of raising the name to deceive. Hence the reason why they don't do it. So this is what we know. Hold on one second. Let me just see if you're back with us. Oh, Ross is gone. Oh, I've got the whole show to myself. Look at this. He's fallen off. Patty says, this is a pet peeve of mine. It totally is for me as well, Patty. I totally agree. Don't know where Ross has gone. He'll be back. But let me just continue here. The only day, when it comes to the Moses scroll, the only day that is divinely sanctified, if you like, is Shabbat. It's just the seventh day. That's the only day that it mentions that we should set apart. Sounds like he's back. Are you back, my friend? There you are.
Hey, I think I'm back. I guess that answers the question about my internet
You fell
signal
off.
being totally fixed. Yeah. I just decided to let you go with it. Sound like you were on a roll. So
I'm on a roll. I'm still going. So I'm just saying that within the Moses scroll, only Shabbat is we're told to keep separate. And I just gave the example of, again, as I mentioned last week, that the Karaites don't observe Hanukkah for this reason, and for the reason that they don't believe that rabbinic authority has the right to introduce holy days, so to speak, and that they don't pray the prayer when they're lighting the menorah that says, "Blessed are you, Adonai Eloheinu, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to kindle the Hanukkah light," right?
yeah,
So according to the Karaites, that's an example of raising the name to deceive, using the name to give a kosher stamp, so to speak, to a practice that was never divinely imparted.
yeah,
Deuteronomy, within the law code, probably inserted during Josiah's reform, only makes mention of Pesach Shavuot, and Sukkot. That's interesting.
Deuteronomy
Yeah,
16, right?
Deuteronomy 16. We'll come back to it. Likewise, Ezra and Nehemiah, who claim to be reading from the scroll of the Torah of Moses in Nehemiah chapter 8, but it seems to be a post-reform edition, if you like. They
You're making
know
some
of
bold claims. Your bold claims there.
well. The reason why I say this, Ross, is because they know of Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. They don't seem to know anything of Yom Kippur or Yom Teruah.
Yeah, we're
And
gonna talk about that. Yeah,
we're going to talk about that. And it's a curious thing because while Ezra reads what I'm calling a post-reform copy before the people, he's reading it on the first of the seventh month, right, from morning until midday. It's a short document. Yom Teruah is never mentioned, even though that is the day that it's supposedly on. Likewise, Yom Kippur is never mentioned. It does say, Ross, in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 18, that there was a solemn assembly on the 8th day of Sukkot, as prescribed. It says, as prescribed, right?
yeah.
And the question becomes, prescribed by whom, right? Because it is not directed in the Moses scroll, nor is it prescribed in Josiah's law code in Deuteronomy chapter 16. The verse says that they were reading from the scroll of the Torah of God. So that's interesting. I don't know if that's, as opposed to the scroll of the Torah of Moses that they were reading from in 8 verse 1, is it possible? I don't know. That the scroll of the teaching of God was something that might have included Numbers chapter 29. We're going to talk about that. But Numbers chapter 29 knows nothing of Yom Kippur. It's interesting. It starts from the first day of the seventh month and goes all the way to the 8th day of Sukkot that says you should have a solemn assembly, but it knows nothing of Yom Kippur. It's interesting. I don't know. But that brings us to another example. So Karaites highlight this as well. And this is the Rosh Hashanah versus Yom Teruah, right?
Yeah.
Karaites acknowledge the latter is divinely ordained. And the former, Rosh Hashanah, is mentioned only in, that phrase is mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. And it has its own problems as well, Ross. So it says, it gives a date at the beginning of chapter 40. Ezekiel says, in the 20th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month. And the phrase, the beginning of the year in Hebrew is Rosh Hashanah, literally meaning the head of the year. And there's no reason why this would be interpreted in any other way than the 10th day of the first month, being the month of Nisan. However, if you rename Yom Teruah as Rosh Hashanah, then the date of Ezekiel's prophecy falls on Yom Kippur, which evidently was all too tempting to do. This is, as far as I'm aware, and you may know more about this, but this is how we ended up with, thanks to Ezekiel, this is how we ended up with Rosh Hashanah, the new year, falling on the first of the seventh month, right? It's really quite curious. But the problem with that is that Ezekiel never mentions Yom Kippur, Ross, which is exceedingly odd. You would imagine that if that was the day that he was referencing, he would certainly make mention of it. Scholars see no reason to spin this in any other way than the plain meaning of the text, which is the 10th of Nisan. But that then raises a question. Does Ezekiel even know of Yom Kippur in the year 572 BCE? So returning to the topic at hand, is Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur of Mosaic origin? Is it divinely instituted? Or does the Tanakh once again raise questions about its origin? Can we get into the finer detail of that, Ross?
Yeah, I think so. That was a good introduction. I think one of the things that most people who are oriented towards a Hebraic, Torah-based life, they're all familiar with not only with the festivals, with keeping the festivals, but also with about the debates within. Do you do it here? Do you do it there? Over the past,
Isn't it highly content? Like the whole
it
calendar
is.
thing is the source of many, many debates and arguments. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting over the last 25 years or so, when I want to study say Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah, as the case may be, I go to all these places in the text, and I'm looking for, first of all, I'm looking for where else is Yom Teruah mentioned. Now you can find a lot on the word. You can find how the word Teruah means, a blast or the sound or, a trumpet blast, or could even be other loud noises. I've written articles like this. But the question is, where do we find Yom Teruah mentioned outside of, well, Leviticus 23 pretty much, and Numbers 29:1. So maybe if we start there, we can look at all these other festivals as well, because I think we need to. But let's at least
Well,
start there, because like you made a couple of comments that caught my attention. You said a few times it's like they don't know about these things. Well, that's an interesting proposal. And I know you're right. I know you're right, because I've read these texts too. The question is why, though? Why don't they know about them if these are part of the authentic, original Mosaic legislation from Horeb Sinai? Why don't they know them? And one more thing, I've always had the impression that from Horeb, these festivals were at least kept by someone without a break for all these years. But I'm going to show tonight, I think we're going to both show that that's not true according to the text.
Can I get you to turn to? Can we start with Numbers chapter 10, verse 10?
Sure.
I'm just curious in your opinion on that, because I know this is not referencing specifically Yom Teruah, uh, but it's curious to me. It seems like this is a practice that is to be, at least Numbers 10 is proposing that this is a practice that should be conducted at the beginning of every month.
Yeah.
So it says here, and I'm reading in the, let's go with the, I don't know, New American Standard. How's that?
Okay.
Also on the day of your joy and at the appointed feasts, and on the first day of the months, you shall blow the trumpet over your burnt offerings and over your sacrifices and your peace offerings, and they shall be as a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Um, is that how? Is that what it seems to you? This is just the standard practice at the beginning of every month?
Well, it sounds, at least in that verse, because if you look, Numbers 10:1 through 10 gives all these reasons for the blowing of the trumpets. And it begins in
Mm,
context talking about the two silver trumpets and, what are they used for and so forth. But yeah, there are these, I think it's 10. I hadn't counted this in a while, but if I remember right, it might be 10 reasons for blowing trumpets of any kind.
really?
So
All right.
it could be, yeah, but it at least begins, if you notice, with this hammered work, these trumpets. I started to grab them. I have them in the back room. I have two,
Oh,
not the
you got a
original
couple
two.
of
Not
silver trumpets, really?
Yeah, but not these, not the two that they're talking. They're not the original ones, but they are silver trumpets. But
All
I've
right.
had those, and I keep them, in the building, obviously, because there's such a mainly for moving of the tribes. The first several verses. But
Mm-hmm.
as you point out, that number 10, your joyous occasions, your fixed festivals, and new moon days, you shall sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings, etc.
Mm.
So it does seem to be that it is associated with the festivals. So, and that's what we're
Uh,
talking about tonight.
yeah, and just the new month in general. Um, from there, and I do. We obviously want to get to Numbers chapter 29 that deals with this considerably, but just a couple of verses in Leviticus 23 that goes through all of these days. And from verse 23, it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, in the seventh month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a solemn rest. So that's in addition to what we just read. There's also a solemn rest that is
Yeah.
to be observed on the first day of the seventh month. A memorial proclaimed with the blast of trumpets, which apparently you do on the beginning of every month. A holy convocation, which makes it separate. You shall not do any ordinary work. You shall present a food offering to the Lord. And I think that's all we have on that in Leviticus, right?
Yeah. Leviticus 23 and Numbers 29. I mean,
And then Numbers 29 goes on in a whole lot of detail. Do you want to get into that?
yeah, let's do that. And I have the JPS open, but we'll
Go on.
just give them all sorts of translations. We can go to the Hebrew where we need to.
And
But
the other thing that's hotly debated, by the way, Ross, is why.
why what?
Anyway, read this one, and then we can talk about that.
Okay,
Why
29.
blow the trumpet? Why Yom Teruah?
Yeah, Numbers 29. In the seventh month, on the first day of the month, that's Yom Teruah, right?
Mm-hmm.
You shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. You shall observe it as a day when the horn is sounded, Jono. You shall present a burnt offering of pleasing odor to Jehovah, one bull of the herd, one ram, 7 yearling lambs without blemish. The meal offering with them, choice flour with oil mixed in, shall be 3/10 of a measure for a bull, 2/10 for a ram, 1/10 for each of the 7 lambs. And there shall be one goat for a sin offering to make expiation in your behalf. In addition to the burnt offering of the new moon with its meal offering and the regular burnt offerings with its meal offering, each with its libation as prescribed offering by fire of pleasing odor to Jehovah.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, when you look at Leviticus 23 through 25, and Numbers 29, 1 through 6, these are the only two, and I'm going to qualify this, but bear with me. These are the only two. They use the precise same phrase in the seventh month on the first day of the month. Biblically, if you look at the Tanakh, these are the only two passages that use that exact phrase.
Right.
So, like when I years ago when I said, "Oh, I want to look in the Bible and want to find every time where this festival of trumpets." Again, verses about trumpets. You can find verses that use truah or a form of that word. But when you look for the first day of the seventh month, you only find that exact phrase in those two places.
In those two places. Hey,
Yeah.
can I just interrupt you just for 1
Yeah.
second? Because
Yeah.
Dave brought up Second Chronicles 35, which of course is Josiah,
Right.
and Josiah talks about he talks about Pesach, obviously.
Pesach, but we're not
He
on Pesach yet.
No, we're not there. He talks about that. I'm just seeing if he makes any reference. I don't think he does make any reference to Yom Kippur or Yom Teruah. Okay,
Well,
and
and that's a good point Dave's bringing up. We're going to definitely get to Josiah, but if you start with Yom Teruah. So remember, if you think the seventh month, basically what we have what are called the high holy days. They begin on Yom Teruah. On the 10th day, it clearly says that on the 10th day, you have Yom Kippur. And of course, that's talked about in Leviticus 23, Leviticus 16. We have limited, but then you look at the rest of the text of the Bible. Where do we read about Yom Kippur? Interestingly enough, I don't know. I mean, how much of that is now? Then you go to the 15th day of the seventh month, and you begin a 7-day festival. So here we've got Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Now,
mm,
Sukkot does seem to show up quite a few places, but as
mm,
we'll show, it does so at the expense of the mentioning of these other festivals in the seventh month. So like you pointed out, Deuteronomy 16, there are a few passages in the Bible, Exodus 23, Exodus 34, and Deuteronomy 16, which mention 3 what are called pilgrimage festivals.
mm,
The biggies. And
sure.
different words are used for those. But in those 3 passages, those are the 3 big festivals where every male shall appear in Jerusalem before Jehovah, etc. But you don't get, as we pointed out, and we're going to show, you don't get Yom Teruah and you don't get Yom Kippur.
Mm,
Now, it strikes you if you really face that, if you really look at it and you think, why not? Now, I did make the statement I said I wanted to qualify. Leviticus 23 and this passage in Numbers 29 are the only ones that say in that exact language in the English and the Hebrew in the seventh month on the first day of the month. The other place that I want to take us to first, and you alluded to it in the opening monologue, is Nehemiah chapter 8. Can we go there now, or did you have something else you want to do first?
Let's do that. And speaking of Nehemiah, I just want to read Patty's comment here that she points out that Nehemiah Gordon, Karaite, brilliant individual,
Yep.
he's the transformation of Yom Teruah, the day of shouting, into Rosh Hashanah, the new year, is a result of pagan Babylonian influence upon the Jewish nation. And of course, that would make perfect sense. I see
What
no reason to
and,
question that.
and what we're going to do is ask another, maybe a more probing question. Yes, yeah, I think that there was certainly influence from Babylon that caused that transformation. The question that we have is one that says, okay, given that,
Mm,
why don't we know about, or why don't the biblical writers seem to know about, from the giving of the Torah, or at Horeb Sinai, up until the return from
mm,
Babylon? Why don't they seem to know about these things before?
mm,
In other words, if you said, well, it used to be called Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, and then when they go to Babylon, they come back and now they call it Rosh Hashanah. Okay.
mm,
Well, where are all those instances between the giving of the Torah and the return from Babylon? Where are all those episodes where give me one, just one?
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
question that we're going to look at. Yeah.
And let's get into that. G'day to Marianne, by the way. She's just
Hey,
tuned in,
Marianne.
and she just made a mention that Genesis 8 verse 4, and the ark rested on the seventh month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the
Right.
mountains of Ararat,
Yeah. And Marianne
which
is
is
another person, a student of the Bible, who's going to look up every reference. We're talking about the seventh month. So as a good
appreciate
Bible
that.
student, she's going to dig
Hmm.
in and go, okay, are all these references? And that's what we have to do in order to dig up and find
Mm,
anything worth finding, basically. So if you go to Nehemiah 8,
yeah.
uh, and you brought this up, Jono. By the way, this same basic story is given in Ezra 3. We can talk about something in Ezra 3 as well. But if you look at
Hmm.
Nehemiah 8, when the seventh month arrived, and I won't read the whole thing, it tells the story in this text where Ezra the scribe brings a scroll of the teaching or Torah of Moses,
Mm,
with which the Lord had charged Israel. Okay, look at verse 2. On the first day of the seventh month. Now, what day is this? This is Yom
it,
Teruah,
it's
according
supposed to be Yom Teruah, yeah.
according to Leviticus 23, and according to Numbers 29. This is Yom Teruah. So
Mm,
you go, now I ought to find some trumpet blowing in here, right? I mean, I ought
you'd think
to.
so,
You'd think you
yeah.
would. And you what you get is he reads from it. Now, notice, first of all, in verse 2, Ezra the priest brought the teaching before the congregation, men, women, and all who could listen with understanding from it. As you said, from the first light until midday, which seems to suggest that, let's say it takes 6 hours with commentary,
Mm,
to the men and women and those who could understand. Everybody. Now, we do have a command, by the way. I'm going to get into some of this coming Saturday. If anybody's listening to us tonight, don't miss Saturday morning. You got to hear Saturday morning, because this is part of the Torah portion. Deuteronomy 31 tells us, as you know, Jono, that there is to be a public reading of the entire Torah of Moses, right?
yeah. Well,
And
this is a really curious thing
yeah,
because it is, and this appears in, yeah, as you said, Deuteronomy chapter 31. Um, it is spoken now. Remind me, this is now it's verse 9 where Moses reads the scroll of the Torah. Right, he reads it all before Israel, folds it up, gives it to the Levites, put it with the. It says that they put it with the ark, right?
mhm.
Um, and then it's verse 10, 11, and 12 that says, oh, by the way, make
Yep.
sure that you read this before everybody. Uh,
At a set
uh,
time, Jono, not just any old time,
it's
but you,
not, but it's not
yeah.
Yom Teruah, though, is it? It's during Sukkot, once every
Ah,
7 years during the festival of Sukkot. Here we have Ezra reading it. This is a very curious thing that I've never really understood. Here we have Ezra reading it to the people on the first day of the 7th month. If they had read it first, and obviously they did, why would they not go, oh, hang on, let's just put this off for a couple of weeks because we can actually fulfill this,
Yeah.
that it appears here in our copy of Deuteronomy, that this is prescribed by God that we should do such a thing. But they didn't. They did it on Yom Teruah, or the first day of the 7th month, and they don't even mention Yom Teruah. There's no blowing of trumpets. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's strange. Now, the answer that I've always had for that is there's no bad time to read through the entirety of the Torah that
Sure.
God gives to Moses. I mean, you can do it any time of year. There's no bad time to read the Torah. But if they find themselves now, are they able to adapt when they find something? Sure, they are, because later in the same context they read about Sukkot. And so
Mm,
they go, look, it says here that we're to go out and get these branches. So let's go get these branches. So you would think that when they got to the part that said, you're to blast, be a day of blasting or whatever, that somebody
mm.
would have said, hey, you think maybe we could just, since we're here and it is the first day of the 7th month, maybe we could just blow while we're right here, you just read it because they were interrupting. It says they had, as they read it, and then they had some interpretation as they went
Yeah,
through.
some explanation and so on and so forth.
Yep.
The Levites giving understanding. They had 6 hours. I mean, it would make perfect sense, but there's no mention of it whatsoever. So, now, can I ask you? So you're now referencing Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 18, in regards to the observance of Sukkot. That it says in verse 15, oh, we've got to go to the mountains and bring leafy branches of olive trees, pine nuts, uh, myrtles, palms, all this sort of stuff, and
Yep.
make booths, as it is written. Um, where would they have got that from, by the way?
Well, I don't
Because that's
know.
not in.
That's right. That's a good question because the species don't match. Interestingly enough, we read in Leviticus 23, verse 40, about 4 species, but as I recall, they're not the same as what we read here in Nehemiah 8.
Mm,
So there's a little bit
yeah.
of a difficulty there.
Well, it just
Um,
makes you wonder exactly what they are reading. Like, I speculated that perhaps, when it comes to verse 18, I think it is, he read from the scroll of the teaching of God as opposed to the scroll of the teaching of
yeah,
Moses. Are they one and the same, whatever scroll that he's got there, whatever edition he has, or are they two separate scrolls that actually has this list? They may have had a scroll that had this particular list.
yeah,
From the first day to the last day, they celebrated the festival 7 days, and then there was a solemn gathering on the 8th day as prescribed. Well, as prescribed, we read that in Numbers chapter 29, as I mentioned. It's also there in Leviticus 23, but Leviticus 23 then goes on to mention Yom Kippur and so on and so forth. It also, just before mentions Yom Teruah, but in Numbers chapter 29, it doesn't mention either of those. And it makes you wonder, is that a portion of what they had? It's not so, you don't have to stretch your mind that far to think that they had a slightly different edition
yeah.
because, as we've mentioned before, there are Dead Sea Scrolls that have significant differences
Well,
in them
even
too.
even to your point, Jono, even without the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have internal differences. We
We
talked
have
about
internal differences.
the 10 words. Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5 are different. Exodus
Yeah,
34
absolutely.
is another one. Leviticus 19. So we do
Mm,
have these differences, and I think a lot of people might get nervous. Whereas I don't want to get nervous, and I don't want to make anyone nervous. I want us to look at this, as Patty said, peel that onion back, and say,
mm,
what is it that we're really seeing when we look at these things? So, for instance, in Nehemiah 8, they're clearly reading what is called the Torah, whether it's called the Torah of the Lord or the Torah of Moses, or they're reading a version of the teaching as they
mhm.
understand it. They're reading at the beginning of the 7th month. They don't react to anything that they read. It says they read it from beginning of the day until the midday, and so they've read through the whole thing. It's not the 5 books as we understand them, because that's at least 20 hours of reading. But nonetheless, there's no reaction like we need, but they do react and say we need to do what it says here and go get the 4 species. But I encourage people to go to compare, do horizontal reading, look at Nehemiah 8, verse 16, 15, 16, and compare that to Leviticus 23, 40, and you'll see that the words are different, not only in English, but in Hebrew. Some might say, who cares? That's, you say tomato, I say tomato. Now, this is like saying tomato and watermelon. It's different words, different kinds of trees. So we have to wonder about that. But then if we can get past that, the question I would have is, were these festivals kept uninterrupted, from the beginning until
Right.
this time? Because, they've been in exile, they come back. But I mean, other than that, like, let's say
Yeah.
right before, let's take everyone back, Jono, to 588 BCE, and there's a righteous group. This is before the destruction of the Babylonians, before the ultimate destruction of the Babylonians on the 10th of Av or the 9th of Av or the 11th of Av, whichever text you go with. But there's somebody there. Were they keeping it? Well, look at the next verse, Jonah, verse 17 of Nehemiah 8. The whole community that returned from the captivity made booths and dwelt in the booths. You go, okay, well, good. The Israelites had not done so from the days of Joshua, son of Nun, to that day.
Isn't that a remarkable thing to say?
It really
Uh,
is.
and there was very great rejoicing. How do they know that, first of all? Why is that
Yeah.
a thing that they know? That seems, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, full disclosure, in the Hebrew, it's sometimes it could be translated because of the pointing Jeshua or Yeshua ben Nun. Well, I think the implication is obvious. I mean, most people recognize that this is referring to the Joshua, the servant of Moses, the servant of God. This is the Joshua. This takes us back. This says that it hasn't been kept. And you might say, well, maybe it wasn't kept right. Okay. But I want people to understand that it's not that Sukkot has been kept by a small remnant perfectly all these times. Here we have evidence that between Leviticus 23, whenever that was written, and Nehemiah 8, the list of species has even changed. So, it's kind of strange. And while I'm on that subject, I don't, there's so many different ways we can go, but I will say that it's interesting that it's not just the festival of Sukkot that they haven't kept, Jono. Because you might go, okay, so they didn't keep Sukkot. Maybe that's just one that they didn't do right. And we've already said that they didn't seem to know about. We'll prove this further. They didn't seem to know about Yom Truah, and they didn't seem to know about Yom Kippur. They didn't really keep Sukkot
Sukkot,
from the time of. But what about Pesach? I mean, Pesach is,
surely,
yeah. I mean, surely they're going to keep that, right?
surely, of
I mean,
course,
surely that one. Look
surely.
at
Come
look
on.
look at Second Kings. Look at 2 Kings chapter 23. By the way, this story that I'm going to talk about, Dave Tyler, because he studies all this all the time, I know because we're on this Shapira team together. But 2 Kings 23 is talking about Josiah's reform. And of course, they find a scroll of the Torah of Moses, according to the text here. We'll get into that more later, another night. But 2 Kings 23, look at verse 22. Now, this is JPS. Now, the Passover sacrifice had not been offered in that manner in the days of the chieftains who ruled Israel, or during the days of the kings of Israel and kings of Judah. Only in the 18th year of King Josiah was such a Passover sacrifice offered in that manner to the Lord in Jerusalem, etc. Now, here, that's kind of a weak translation. It's not so literal. I encourage people to dig into that a little bit deeper. But in essence, what it's saying is that from the time of the judges, that Pesach had not been kept as written. Now, the qualifier here is in Jerusalem, according to the English translation of 2 Kings 23. Now, remember, that's only in Deuteronomy where it talks about go to the place where I'll place my name. It's not in Exodus. It's only in Deuteronomy in that priestly section known as the legal code. So that's kind of, I don't want to tear into that yet. That onion, we'll leave that strip.
But it's convenient though, isn't it? It's
It
convenient.
is.
If hypothetically, if Josiah introduced the official observance of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and he goes, "Oh, I just found the scroll, and it's also got this stuff in it. We've never actually kept this ever since the time of coming out of Egypt and so on and so forth." It's a little bit
Well,
suspicious.
let's complicate things a little bit more, can we?
All right, go ahead.
This same story is also told in the Chronicles. If you look at 2 Chronicles 35.
Second Chronicles. Oh, this is where Dave was going. Hey, before we get there, Patty just said it is interesting that these days, these feast days coincide with the equinoxes. It is really curious.
Yeah, it is.
I agree with you, Patty.
Yeah.
So Second Chronicles 35.
Yeah, 2 Chronicles 35 is the same story, a different source, but the same story of Josiah's Passover that was unlike any before it. Now remember, 2 Kings 23 says it hadn't been kept since the day of the judges, the time of the judges.
Oh, Dave, Judges. Okay, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, I think this translation said chieftains, but it's shoftim.
Right,
Now,
right.
look at this verse 17, 2 Chronicles 35. All the Israelites present kept the Passover at that time and the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. Since the time of the prophet Samuel, no Passover like that one had ever been kept in Israel. None of the kings of Israel had kept a Passover like the one kept by Josiah and the priests and the Levites in all Jerusalem and Israel there present and the inhabitants of Jerusalem.
This is simple then, Ross. What that means is that we should be able to go back to the book of Judges or the book of First, Second Samuel and see where it talks about them keeping Pesach.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we looked at the Pentateuch in the Torah, was there a Passover other than the original leaving Egypt? Because remember, they're in the desert for 40 years, so maybe there's another Passover.
It's got to be
20 of them. What would you think? Maybe 10 of them? How about 5? Maybe 3?
3? Maybe
What
3?
about one other one? And
There's got to
that's
be
in
at least
Numbers.
3. Come on.
No, it's just the Numbers chapter 9. And I
Numbers
find
chapter 9.
that odd. And so you have these things. You think you got to keep this every year. You got to do it every year at this time of year, and yet we just don't have examples of it. And here we have witnesses, late witnesses in the biblical period. One, we're talking about after the exile. Even in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, where it says basically that these festivals, get it out of our head, I think is what the Bible is saying, that these were kept without break for sure. You could say, well, maybe they were kept, but they weren't kept right. Well, okay, but they certainly weren't kept right. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, here's another curious thing. Speaking of Ezra and Nehemiah, so as we continue in Nehemiah from chapter 8 to chapter 9, chapter 9 kicks off like this: on the 24th day of this month, and we're still talking about the 7th month, the Israelites they assembled, fasting in sackcloth and with earth upon them. Those of the stock of Israel separated themselves from all foreigners. Okay. And stood and confessed their sins and their iniquities, the iniquities of their fathers. Standing in that place, they read from the scroll of the teaching of the Lord their God. And if we are talking about the same scroll that they read in the beginning of chapter 8, it says here that for 1/4 of the day, they were reading, and for the other quarter of the day, they confessed and prostrated themselves before the Lord their God. Now, this is on the 24th day. It sounds a lot like Yom Kippur, right?
Maybe. Yeah, you might think that there's fasting going on.
There's nothing there that says that they are doing this as it is prescribed. It's curious that you could say this is in the same way that you have the 8th day of Sukkot. This would be the 10th day of Sukkot, which is very
Yeah,
curious. But
yeah.
there's nothing about it that claims to be Yom Kippur. And if there was such a thing, Ross, my point is, wouldn't they have done so on the 10th? It's very, very curious.
Yeah, and so speaking of curious, if we go back to this seventh month, this, you would think that the seventh, these are the high holy days as we think of them now in Judaism, and Torah-oriented folks consider these the high holy days. The first day is the Yom Teruah, 10th is Yom Kippur, and the 15th is the beginning of Sukkot. So at least these, the holy month, the seventh month. But if you let's look at Second Chronicles 5. And by the way, the
Oh, yeah.
corresponding story to Second Chronicles 5 is the text in First Kings 8, which is the dedication. What we're dealing with here, Jono,
Oh, yeah, right.
is the dedication of the the Beit Hamikdash, the temple.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at
Solomon.
chapter 5, this is Solomon. Again, this is the same as 1 Kings 8, but are not the same. It's the same story, different version of it. Verse
Mm-hmm.
3 of 5, 2 Chronicles 5. All the men of Israel assembled before the king at the feast in the seventh month. Okay, so you go, all right, well, what feast? Because you could say, well, quite often in biblical literature or in biblical works, dictionaries and so forth, they call the feast of the seventh month is often associated with Sukkot. So you go, well, maybe this is talking about Sukkot. Let's not get over our head here. All right. So it says
Mm-hmm.
they're assembled before the king the feast in the seventh month. Now, if you roll through here, you get to say verse 8. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. The feast for 7 days. Where are we looking for? Let's see. I'm looking for the past. Oh, because the verses are different in the English and the Hebrew. Let me
It's
let
a
me find.
controversial verse that you were referencing, though. The cherubim had their wings spread out over the place. So there's a whole. We won't get into it now, but there's a whole question of which way were the cherubim facing,
Oh yeah,
uh, which is the other ark, not the ark that Moses made, but the ark. Anyway, this is a much longer story. Which
yeah.
verse are you referencing?
I'm looking for, and maybe it would be easier. Let me look at First Kings 8 because I have two accounts of this
Mm-hmm.
in the Bible, and basically what it says is it gives a little bit more detail. But if we look at, let's look at First Kings um, chapter 8. I'm sorry, First Kings 8:65. Let's start there. And it says, so Solomon and all Israel with him, a great assemblage coming from Lebohamat in the Wadi to the Wadi of Egypt, observed the feast. At
Mm-hmm.
that time, before the Lord our God, 7 days. So you go, well, is it talking about Sukkot? Well, maybe. And again, 7 days, 14 days in all. Now, on the eighth day, he let the people go. And they bade the king goodbye and went to their homes, joyful and glad of heart, all over all the goodness that the Lord had shown to his servant David and to his people. So, this particular passage, let me see if I can pull up my Bible program and make sure. Maybe I can find it easier there. I'm looking for the same account, different version of that account in Second Chronicles, Jono. So if you see it before I do, but I'm going to go.
While you're looking for it,
Yeah.
2 Chronicles 7 verses 8 to 10.
Okay.
While you're having a look at that, another thing that I found absolutely fascinating. This is beside the point, but I have to say, and this is a study note from Mark Bretler of this particular publication,
Yeah.
that all the sacrifices, Ross, that had taken place apparently for the dedication of the temple. He makes a point of saying that it would have been non-stop activity, the rate of sacrifice for 2 weeks nonstop activity would have been 1 oxen and 6 sheep every minute, every 60
Do all the
seconds.
sacrifices.
My word, for 2 weeks, nonstop, 1 oxen and 6 sheep. I got to say, that's completely unbelievable. And I mean, I don't believe that. I just don't believe that. I don't think that's possible. That's an incredible amount of slaughter.
It really is, and I think as we work through this again here in the 7th month, and it just seems to be that there is no awareness, if you will, of supposed to take place at the beginning. During this time in the 7th month, you just don't see it going on. Let me look at this. Okay, here we go. Jono, if you fast forward to chapter 7 of 2nd Chronicles,
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was somewhere here. Okay, in verse 8, 2nd Chronicles 7:8. At that time, Solomon kept the feast for 7 days. You go, well, which feast is it? All Israel with him. A great assemblage from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. Now, this is a matching text to what we read in 2nd Chronicles 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is telling us the same thing. Now, verse 9. On the 8th day, they held a solemn gathering. They observed the dedication of the altar 7 days and the feast 7 days. And then on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he dismissed the people to their homes, rejoicing and in good spirits over the goodness that the Lord had shown. So now we can then say, okay, well, if we're talking about the festival of Sukkot, which begins on the 15th and goes until the 23rd, ultimately, by the time you finish, maybe this is talking about Sukkot. But again, where is the mention of the other festivals in the first part of the 7th
So
month?
let me get this straight. So are you saying this is our only other reference? So we don't. Are you saying we don't have a reference of Pesach in 1st or 2nd Samuel? Are you saying we don't have a reference of Pesach being observed in Judges, for example?
I don't recall. Do you recall any? I mean,
I don't recall. I'm just saying.
yeah.
So, all right. So really, all the feast days. I mean, what about Shavuot? We read about.
Well,
Do we read
let's
about
look
the
at.
observance of Shavuot
Yeah,
in
I'm
Ruth,
sorry.
for example?
I just thought of something. So
Go
if
ahead.
you go back to the book of Joshua, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the time of Joshua, when they cross into the land,
Mm-hmm.
right, that says that they kept the Passover, right? Remember now, no one, this is interesting as well, no one had been circumcised during the 40
I was
years,
just about to say, yeah,
which is,
right.
again, that's kind of, but anyway, no one's circumcised. And they cross into the land, and that year, it says they kept the Passover. But if you work your way through, you would expect to see the festivals being kept. But then again, we get this reference that no Sukkot has been kept since Joshua in Nehemiah chapter 8.
Mm,
No Passover like this had been kept since the days of the judges. It's just curious, as you've said, that the festivals, which are so important today, for
yeah,
people who seek to live their life according to the way. And I think it comes out wanting when you look for the
they're
evidence.
remarkably absent in the Tanakh. And Patty makes that point. She says uh, interesting throughout the Tanakh. Jehovah emphasizes the 7th day of Shabbat. If these other days were so important, wouldn't there be more emphasis on them? You would absolutely think there would be.
Yeah.
And there's a inconsistency throughout the Tanakh as to how and if they were even kept. G'day, Derek. Derek's tuned in.
Hey, Derek, how's it going?
Nana. And Patty points out that our mate Ron, owner of a cattle ranch, says that it would have been impossible to slaughter that many animals like that. That many
Look,
animals per minute. That's just incredible.
I didn't notice this note, Jono, but this is a note that
Mm,
actually, and you give notes as much value as they're worth. I mean, they have to be checked.
mm,
You have to go through and check. But here's the deal. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, the footnote in the Jewish Study Bible says this: the conclusion of the ceremony, 1 Kings 8:65 and 66, which I just read, seems unaware of both Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement / Purgation, which falls on the 10th of the 7th month, according to Leviticus 3, 26 through 32, and Numbers 29, 7 through 11, and the 8th day assembly following the 7th day of Sukkot from Leviticus 23, 36, and Numbers 29, 35 through 38. This is very interesting. It's like these are perfect opportunities to say, here is where we're going to do this. Why? Because the Torah
It's
says to
commanded.
do it. And it's simply not there. So what does all this mean? One possibility is that they did not know of these texts. And you go, surely they knew the Torah. But was
it?
Well, that's the other question is it the same as what is written here? In other words, did they have Leviticus 23? It doesn't seem that they did. I mean, it really doesn't.
And Russ, correct me. This is the view of the scholars in general, is that the priestly information, these sort of texts with all the sacrifices and so on and so forth, come much later. This is the latest information. This is the view of the scholars, right?
Yeah, and it's, you go, well, I don't care what a scholar thinks. I believe in the Bible. I don't care what a scholar. Well, it again, you have to weigh the reason that this is believed is because of what we're talking about tonight. It's that it's just not there. And when you do read, like, we tend to want to think that Israel, the people of Israel, were keeping to the T, dotted I's, crossed T's, the Torah of Moses, Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. But that can't be the case, because anyone who reads the Bible knows that's not the case. They're always in trouble. They're always in trouble because they're not following it. And it seems that in some cases, they certainly didn't know the text as we now have them. And so the academic view concerning sacrifices, and particularly the priestly code, which would include the days, the times, and seasons as we have them now, they just simply didn't know them. They didn't have them. Because you would think that, I mean, when you read in Nehemiah 8 that since the time of Joshua, Sukkot hadn't been kept right, you go, well, what? Yeah, but I bet David kept it right. Well, you would think that would be mentioned there.
That's right.
Do we have a text where it says that David kept Sukkot, or that the Passover is kept by these godly kings?
It's curiously absent and remarkably contradictory throughout the texts. Can we return to the Moses Scroll just for a second?
Sure.
Because it's also an interesting thing that Yom Teruah, it doesn't give a reason for Yom Teruah. Is there a reason, Ross, a specific reason? Is it articulated in any of the texts in Leviticus or Numbers that says you will observe Yom Teruah as memorial of such and such? The reason why we do Yom Teruah is because da-da-da.
It's a memorial for blowing of trumpets, but other than that, no.
So we don't exactly know. Yom Kippur is it was William Tyndale that coined the word atonement. It's at one-ment, so that Israel and God are at one once again. All of their sins are covered, is the idea. And that is an entirely foreign concept to the Moses Scroll. The Moses Scroll is very, very simple. It just has 10 words, 10 matters, and each word has a corresponding blessing and curse.
Yeah.
If you would like to be, if you would like that it may go well with you, as Jeremiah chapter 7 puts it, these are the 10 things that I want you to observe, to guard.
Yeah.
If you do not guard these things, and in fact do the opposite, well, then these are the curses that are going to be detrimental to you in life going forward. You choose.
Yeah.
But you bear the consequences of your actions. as is reiterated in now that is something that is repeated quite often throughout the Tanakh. Is that that which you do has consequences,
Yeah.
and that God knows the heart and gives according to your actions. So it seems to be that simple. That's the concept and there's no call for Israel to wipe the slate clean, to start again, to find forgiveness, to seek at-one-ment in any way. There's just you do or you don't do, and
Yeah. I put
this is the way it
before you,
works.
kind
But
of
put
like I
before
put
you.
before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Which one do you choose?
Mm,
And then it becomes the onus is on us, as we say. It's like
exactly.
you choose one way or the other. Now, but let's say, and I don't want to interrupt your flow of thought on the
No, that
Moses
was
stuff.
all. I just wanted
I
to,
wanted
yeah.
to throw one other point in on that point, and that is, let's say somebody goes, well, look, I don't care about a Moses scroll. I don't care about any of that stuff. I just want to follow the Bible.
Hmm.
Jono, I want to keep this is the way they would say it. I want to keep Yom Truah as it's been kept since the beginning of time. Well, the first thing, it hasn't been kept since the beginning of time. We've already
Mm,
shown that. In fact, most of the texts don't even know about it. Outside of the Pentateuch, they don't even know about it. I mean, obviously, it says they don't know about it. And
mm,
then the next thing was, let's say they really did know about it, but this writer in Chronicles or Nehemiah doesn't know that. Let's say there were a group of people. How did they keep it? You say, well, they kept it just like the Bible tells me. Well, what is that? Well, Numbers 29 calls for certain sacrifices and stuff. Well, everyone who follows the biblical text would know that you can't do that anyway.
mm.
You can't do it without a building that's built. You got to have the temple as that it developed, the belief system developed, that you have to go to the place that God chooses. By the way, before Deuteronomy, nobody knows that.
Mm.
If you read the other text, you have Abraham, he's sacrificing all over the place. Isaac, Jacob, you got all the,
Some of the
everybody.
judges,
Yeah, the judges
Gideon.
are all
Hmm.
over the place. The kings, the prophets, Elijah's got sacrifices going
Yeah.
up on Mount Carmel, and he's
Hmm.
challenging the bad guys. And nobody seems to know that there's only one
About
place
the
that you can
centrality.
sacrifice.
Mm.
But let's say that all of those issues aren't really issues. They are, but let's say they're not. Then the bottom line is no one can do that anyway. So if you were going to keep Yom Truah, the only thing we know that you do other than the sacrifices is what? Blow a horn,
Mm.
make some noise. Basically, don't work and blow a horn. Now, the question becomes, though, is that part of the original authentic teaching?
So another thing that I find, just you talking about that reminds me of the fact that because the question often comes up, well, what are we to do for those who want to follow it as it is written in the Tanakh, as it presents itself in the Pentateuch? How are we to observe these things when we don't have a temple and we don't have a functioning priesthood and we don't have sacrifices and da 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 da? And then the answer that you would get is particular passages in Psalm or what is it, Hosea chapter 14, verse 2, that says,
Yeah,
well, this is the remedy. We don't, you know what, we don't really need the sacrifices because we can uh, render for bulls the offering of our lips, the words of
right,
our lips,
right.
and so on and so forth. Well, if that was a possibility, surely we could have
Done that
spared.
all along.
And was
Why
there
do you
really?
do that all along?
Did
Hang
we
on.
did we ever need to sacrifice one oxen and six sheep every second? Was it every second? No, it was every minute for 2 weeks nonstop,
Yeah,
according to what was it? First Kings chapter 8,
yeah. Well,
the
and
dedication of the temple to Solomon.
to that point, Jono, and we've talked about this before. Micah would certainly say no. I mean, you
Mm,
say, Micah, with what shall I come and appear before God? And he goes through a list. Should I sacrifice? Should I offer thousands of rivers of oil and my
mm,
firstborn for the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Would he be happy with this? Would he be happy with that? And it says, no. The answer is no, he wouldn't. All he wants is to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. It really could be. What if faith really is that simple? Now, a lot of people right now, I was talking to Patty and Dave earlier. Right now, they have, and we may have mentioned this last week, so forgive me if I'm being repetitive, but it's constantly in the news and in our world. They have these cows, these red cows. They have them in
Oh, yeah.
Israel right now, and they got them
Yep.
in two different locations. And what's the point of all that? Well, when they reach the age that they're blessed to be able to be used, they're
Oh, there's an
gonna,
age as well.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they're gonna, kill the cow. They think if it doesn't have any, it's got to have only red hair. It can't have, because it's a red heifer, numbers 19. But you think, well, where are the examples where that was used in the biblical text? So you get this. The Pentateuch gives us this fully developed sacrificial system that has all of this in it. And what I've stressed in my teaching the last couple of years, and it's to the consternation of some. Some have been kind of upset that we're doing this, but the question becomes, I want to know. I want to know what was the original message. And if the
That's right.
majority of these texts are in the third person, what's the problem? Maybe some of it was added later. And people go, well, that's a big problem. Well, I'm sorry, but we do have these difficulties in the text. And the only way to sort it out is to look at it intently. And it's not being disrespectful. Look, if this text is deserving of our attention, so are the forthcoming words as we read them. We're not making things up. We're showing no one did this right for however many hundreds of years, you
Yeah,
know?
so it's problematic. It is problematic within the Tanakh there, and you've highlighted all of those inconsistencies and problems, and that's brilliant. It's entirely incompatible with the Moses Scroll, and the reason why we keep turning back to it is because, of course, the Moses Scroll is the only document that we have that claims to be a copy of the Scroll of the Torah of Moses, is in Paleo Hebrew, an ancient form. It claims to be much, much older than anything else that we have.
Yeah.
And as we are often saying in these programs, it consistently solves the problems that we're discussing today. And I'm compelled by it. I think you are too. So,
Yeah.
um,
These festivals that, a lot of people, even within, I don't know what you call it, maybe the Hebrew roots movement, there are a lot of people who are still attached in their faith orientation to the New Testament text. And what is it that draws all of these people, almost without
authenticity,
exception, almost without exception, when I talk to people and go, how did a good guy like you end up in a place like this? And they
right?
always say, I started reading and I saw that the Sabbath, it said it was forever, and
Mm-hmm.
it drew me into this. Or I began to study the festivals, and I see that these festivals are forever. And so I understand that this topic can be a little bit, it can make people uneasy. But what we want to do is we want to say, what measures up when we really put this under the microscope, and we think about it, we pray about it, we study it, and we find that we have these tensions in the text. I believe that what begins to emerge is almost a thumbprint. You begin to see certain things which you go, that doesn't that doesn't line up with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one or the other or neither is accurate. So what's the truth here? And I think that's what we really have to do with this. So when you look at the festivals, particularly those in the seventh month, we have no knowledge seemingly of Yom Truah or Yom Kippur in the biblical text, up to and including when they returned from Babylon.
Right.
I
So
mean, maybe I'm missing some. I don't know.
no, that, I mean, obviously that is the case, and it has to be. Just in maybe if we bring this to a close, my point would be that we have to wrestle with this information. We have to study it if we're serious about our faith. And we have to draw a conclusion, because if this is a latter addition to the text, then it would be an example of, as I just read, the seventh word in the Moses scroll, which says, "You shall not lift my name to deceive, for I will avenge the iniquity of fathers unto sons, unto grandsons, and unto great-grandsons, for lifting my name to deceive." That is, I will avenge the iniquity of fathers misleading impressionable youth and using my name to give it a kosher stamp, so to speak. It is, again, it's the reason why Karaites don't observe Hanukkah. And I, for one, feel the weight of that now when I'm reading about things like Yom Kippur and Yom Teruah and Sukkot and all of these things. Now, I have nothing against memorializing days. Like, for example, Ross, Pesach,
Right.
the Moses scroll does say, God says, "I liberated you from Egypt."
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that being the case, undoubtedly that would be something worth memorializing, right?
Sure.
Where it becomes a problem, as the Karaites point out, is when you say, "Oh, God commanded us to do X," and we have no reliable record of that commandment actually being
But even if
imparted.
someone would argue with you, Jono, and say, but we do have reliable records. We have Exodus 12. It says you're going to do this, but then they didn't. So you have to wonder, did someone not get the message? Or
Mm,
was this later? Like if you go to
mm,
a Passover Seder now and pick your denomination. If you go to a Hebrew roots, you're going to get one version of it, obviously. If you go to
mm,
a Chabad, you're going to get another. Go to an Orthodox, a Reform, whatever. I mean, I have on my shelf, I don't know how many Seders that I have, or I mean,
mm.
I'm not Seders, but I have all of the uh, every one that I have seen in the last several years, the Haggadahs from who knows where, they're all different, but though, and I'm not saying that's bad because, like you said, they're trying to use these meals as a way to teach the Exodus from Egypt. Great thing. Now,
Mm.
let me say one thing to kind of put my stamp on the end of this from my end, unless you want to keep going, and that is,
All right.
if I gave a quiz right now, Jono, and I said, go through for me what day in the seventh month Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Could most people listening to me do that? You go, yeah. Now I'm going to help people if they're a little nervous. Seventh month, first day of the month is Yom
Yom
Teruah.
Teruah,
All right. 10th day, seventh
Yom
month,
Kippur.
Yom Kippur. And then on the 15th begins Sukkot. Now, go with me to Ezra chapter 3. I bet Ezra knows that as well. Ezra
Ezra chapter
chapter
3.
3.
All right. Well, this is
Yep.
interesting. Okay, here we go.
Ezra 3, verse 1. When the seventh month arrived, Jono, the Israelites being settled in their towns, the entire people assembled as one man in Jerusalem. Yeshua, son of Jozadak, and his brother priest, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his brothers set to and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings upon it, as it's written in the teaching of Moses, the man of God. They
Hmm.
set up the altar on its site because they were in fear of the people of the lands, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings each morning and evening. Then they celebrated the festival of tabernacles, as it is written. All right. Now, when does it start? On the
Well, we
15th.
must be on the 15th, right?
Must be on the 15th. With
Hmm.
its daily burnt offerings in proper quantities on each day, as is prescribed for. Make sure you get it right. Followed by the regular burnt offering and the offerings of the new moons, and for all the sacred fixed times of the Lord, and whatever free will offerings were made to the Lord. From the first day of the seventh month, they began to make burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the temple of the Lord had not been laid. Now, interestingly enough, I'd like people to think about that. Now, is there a different way to read it? Or is it seems to be flowing in context
Hmm.
with the Festival of Tabernacles.
It sounds like
Can you
they
read it?
kicked off
You
with
could.
Sukkot on the 1st of the 7th month, and once again, there's no mention of Yom Teruah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because I hadn't noticed that before.
Yeah, there's some difficulties. There's tension in the
Ambiguity,
text when it,
yeah,
Yeah,
ambiguity perhaps, yeah.
yeah, and so I think the main thing, of course, I encourage everyone to seek these matters out on their own. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're not forcing anybody to think like we think, except
Well, we
that,
don't force anyone to tune in, but keep going, yeah.
yeah, but
But you're
our
here now,
point
and if you're
is
watching, then
go
here's the
look
information.
at go look at
That's
the
right.
text. And
Mm.
and look, there have been people who've written me and said, "Oh, Ross, you missed this. What about this verse and this verse and this verse?" It could happen. It could happen. Somebody might show me that these things that we're talking about tonight are not as we've said they are. But I think they won't. I think
Mm.
what they'll find is that the festivals, in the way that we now understand them, are a product of a later period. They reach their final form in a later period. I
Yeah.
think that when Jeremiah says, according to the text in Jeremiah 7, and we're using biblical text even in these difficulties,
Mm.
Jeremiah 7, God says, add your burnt offerings to your sacrifices and eat meat. For in the day that I brought you out of the land of Egypt, I never spoke to your fathers concerning sacrifices. But this is what I
Mm-hmm.
told them: obey my voice, and you'll be my people, and I'll be your God. Now, that's interesting. Amos chapter 5 makes it very clear. Did your fathers offer sacrifices to me in the wilderness? And if some people would say, yes, they did,
Mm-hmm.
Amos is clearly expecting, no, they didn't. You've got these tensions in the text. So
Mm.
what if the thing that what did Moses write? I've talked about this for years now. Now, this week, by the way, on Shabbat, I'm going to be talking about some things that might be a little bit controversial. But get this, Jono, I wanted to do this live last week and the internet was messed up. And so now
All right.
I'm more ready. So
Excellent.
not only now am I going to be able to focus on Deuteronomy 31, which is a third person account telling
Mm-hmm.
us about the scroll that Moses wrote. I've got that, and I've got some of the things that we've covered tonight. But here's the other thing: I can now tell people when Moses wrote that scroll. I
Mm-hmm.
found something in the text that puts it on the map chronologically. Not only do I know what was in that scroll, but I know when he wrote it. And I know that by the time Deuteronomy comes into the picture, it's a recitation. Is that right? Yeah, recitation
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
something which was written prior, and I can now show when it was written. So I'm looking forward to this. But it wasn't Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. It can't be. We have too
Mm-hmm.
many anachronisms. We have things that are late in the game. We have
Mm.
insertions. Now, a lot of people go, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know there's a few little insertions here or there. No, no, not a few. Not a few. The Torah that Moses wrote is an itty bitty document. He
Mm-hmm.
writes it. He gives it to the Levites. They put it mitzad ha'aron. They put it in the side of the ark or beside the ark. And it's supposed to be kept there. And he says, look, I know you're going to corrupt this. He says that. And guess what? Deuteronomy 4:2. Don't add to, don't take away. Guard this little bitty
Mm.
document. You could read it with commentary in a few hours, Jono. You could instruct people on it.
That's right. I mean, now, I want to champion this. I just want to keep coming back and championing this, and say to the people, listen, be originalists with us. Be originalists with us. If you haven't already got the Moses Scroll, get it and read about this ancient document that claims to be a copy of the scroll of the Torah of Moses. And it is a document that you can read in 20 minutes, Ross,
Yeah.
this particular document.
Yep.
Um, and as I say, it solves all the problems. So that's where we're at. So, okay, so I'll be tuning in on. Well, no, I'm not going to tune in because it's like 2
You
in
have
the
to
morning.
catch it
But
at another time,
I'm going to watch
obviously.
it when I wake up. I just want to say that Patty earlier on, she said, "Hey Patty, in my opinion, this is the most important Bible study today. Thanks, guys." And she just said years ago I had to read the part when they were to put the blood on the big toe, and I just couldn't do it. I refused to read.
Yeah,
It is that there's examples like that. I mean, that's a really good example. On the earlobe, on the thumb, on the toe, sprinkle the blood all around, all this sort of stuff. And it makes you wonder, and I know so many people feel this way in the back because they don't want to say anything because it's in the text. There it is. It's in the Bible. You
yeah,
can't question it. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking, really? This is
yeah,
a thing? Are you serious? They bring the heifer down and they break its neck and try and figure out who murdered who. Really, is that
yeah,
a thing that God ordained? Are you serious? Is it? Okay, all right, I guess. They make the woman drink the dust off the floor and then her guts fall out, or what? What? This is the
yeah,
thing that God. There's a lot of that stuff, particularly in the priestly text, that, as Patty just said, it just feels wrong. Marianne says, yeah, a lot of weirdness with all the blood splashing. No, I
yeah,
know. And uh, again, when you thoroughly familiarize yourself with the Moses scroll, you see that all of this is foreign. It's not necessary. It in no way complements that text. If this document is what it claims to be, then everything else would appear to be added. It would be a case of lifting the name to deceive. And I want to be for myself, I want to be very, very careful about infringing upon that commandment. Ross.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like people might be thinking, because look, I grew up, and I think most people I'm guessing most people who are listening to us probably grew up in a fundamentalist form of religion that said this Bible, mine, for me, it was the King James Bible. It had 66 books, and I've constantly, my desire, the entire journey has been take me to the truth, God, take me to the truth. I don't care what it is, take me to the. And the
Mm,
more I read, the more I had to challenge my preconceived ideas. And it
mm,
was uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable at times.
mm,
But I desired to know what is the ultimate truth. And I did this class weeks ago about what's not the ideal. And there's some big ones there. Did
mm,
God ever want a temple? And the answer to that for me was no. And I showed it from the text. Sacrifices. God says, I desire chesed, but lo zavak, and not sacrifice. You go,
mm,
how can you come back from that? If you say, I don't desire sacrifice, everybody, most people, fundamentalists go, yeah, well, he desires them if your heart is right. But as you pointed out earlier, Jono, if he doesn't need them now, and if Hosea 14 and some of these other texts which say, look, God really just wants your heart and to
mm,
be obedient. Could you be obedient? Like, could you keep these 10 maybe? Now they're
mm,
big 10. It's a big 10. But like I don't have any desire to steal. But
mm,
what about the full implications of that? If I'm an employee, would I take something from work, like remove a stapler and bring it home? That's stealing. What about if somebody? Hey, here's a good one, Jono. And I don't want to get into this too much, but let's say you wrote a book. Let's say you
mhm.
wrote a book and you called it, say, the Moses Scroll. And
Right.
another scholar read your book and liked it. And they said, I really like your book. And then, because they're connected, they get on a show. Let's say, I don't know, a radio show, a popular radio show,
Mhm.
uh, coast to coast or something, some
Something
big.
like that. Yeah,
And they get
just as
on
an
there and
example.
they talk about the Moses scroll, and they go into a lot of detail about the Moses scroll. And let's say, Jono, that they even quote your translation. Now, all of that's okay if they only say, you got to read the Moses scroll by Jono
Yeah.
Vandal. I mean, that's all they got to say.
Ross
But
Nichols.
what if they didn't? You know, is that taking someone else's, anyway. That's just
That's
a
a,
an
things
example.
like that wouldn't happen. Things
No, they
like that
would.
wouldn't happen
No,
if
they
people.
would.
No, you're absolutely right. So Patty's laughing. I'm laughing because we know that this actually happened to you.
And let's
It's really
say
funny.
one other thing. Let's say that the radio show went with such a smash that you then took your show on the road and you got a replica of the Moses scroll and you
Oh
showed
yeah.
that to a congregation. And let's say that that went pretty well. And you got a call from that radio show and said, I've got a TV show called, I don't know, maybe called Beyond Belief or something, But this is Beyond Belief. And then you did a show video interview about the
There
same
you go.
subject. And you still
And you
didn't
still
say.
don't mention the book.
So
Which
anyway,
is why I'm constantly mentioning it, because it really is just so exceptional. And if you don't have it already, you've got to get it. Again, on Amazon, and probably still rating pretty well.
it is. It's doing
Um,
pretty well.
but those sort of things would not happen if people were to keep just the 10 words that are in the Moses Scroll. We would have a far more considerate and respectful society, and I'd love to live in a society like that. And as it continues to say in Jeremiah, where you were just quoting Jeremiah chapter 7, where it says, I don't need your sacrifices. What I want is for you to keep my commands, that it may go well with you. And
Yeah,
that is just, as I've mentioned before, the perfect summary of the Moses Scroll, the document there. You've just put up the Tanakh tour. Boy, oh boy, we're less than a month out. If you want to come with us to Israel, go on a tour in Israel in November, or to go to Jordan, or if you'd like to do both, you can certainly do that, and you'll save yourself $100 off the tickets if you do that. Now is the time to put your deposit down, because we're starting to shore things up. We're finalizing reservations and all that sort of stuff, because we're only a month out, and we've got to tie this up. So get onto that, tanaktours.com, link at the bottom of the screen. And because we still have room for you. There is still
we
a little bit of
do.
room.
We do. And just to underscore that, not only do they get to hang around with us for, the full time, however long they sign up for, either Israel or Israel and Jordan, but it's not just going to these wonderful sites and going through the biblical text with great detail, but they also get the downtime. And what that means is
Mm,
we go to dinner together, we eat together, we sit around in lobbies in these beautiful hotels and we talk about the Bible. And people, they say, well, you guys have been saying this, but let me prove you wrong. And we say, let's do it. Let's have some fun. And we talk about the Bible. And then at 10:30 at night, someone says, I'd really like to walk to the Western Wall tonight. Can anybody go? And we go, let's do it.
let's
And we
do it.
go to the Western Wall. It,
Mm,
it's it's that kind of interaction. Uh, you can't. I mean, you can't underestimate what this will do for your faith. I mean, we're together, other than short times of sleep that we have to get to function the next day. You got to do it. If there's any way
yeah,
you can go, join us on the Israel Tanakh tour or the Israel Jordan tour, or the
or both.
Tanakh Jordan, or both. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's that easy. And you get $100 off. You can use that money.
$100 off a combination discount. Again, tanaktours.com. So get onto it, because we're rapidly running out of time, and we've got to wrap up all of these. Guys are the best. Thanks, Patty.
Thanks,
Oh, that's
Patty.
nice.
You guys are the best for
You
listening to
guys are the
us.
best. Ross talking about downtime in the lobby. I think of you guys. Um, Ross and Jono's tour of bonus visiting Israel. Thanks, Jarek. No, downtime in the lobby with Dave and Patty.
And
Love
we've
that.
done that plenty of time. We just
We've
got
done
back
that.
from a trip with
I
them
know.
to Israel and Jordan. So, in fact, by the way, that was our um, reconnoiter. That was our recon trip. And Dave and Patty rented the car, and we took off and traveled the
Mm.
highways and byways of Jordan and Israel. So,
Hey, Ben
look, we're
Michael.
ready for this. We're trained.
Yeah,
What's
no, and thanks
up,
to
Ben
Dave and
Mike?
Patty, because we needed to. I feel so much more confident about the whole thing, because having been there and checked out how everything works in Jordan, this is the first time that we went to Jordan, and Dave and Patty made that possible. So I'm looking forward to getting back there because it was spectacular. And when I was there, I thought to myself, how has it been that I've waited this long to get to Petra?
Yeah.
It's an amazing, awesome experience. That is the program for G'day Pam for this week.
Hey,
We'll be
Pam.
back this time next week, and until then, have a great one.
Wait. Pam
Cool.
Stoll, tell Lee that I said happy birthday. I think I told him on
Oh,
Facebook, but if I didn't, he just had a birthday, so it's not too late. If I am late,
happy birthday, Lee.
and
And
the other thing is one more reminder: Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. Central
yes,
Time. Don't miss this one. I promise you. If you do, everyone else is going to say you shouldn't have, and you can say it's my fault because I told you. Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. Central Time. It's one question from Derek.
uh,
Yes.
Derek said, yeah, Tavia will be joining us in Jerusalem.
Yep.
And we're going to be spending. We're kicking off in Jerusalem this year. We usually start in Tel Aviv, but we're kicking off in Jerusalem, and Tavia will be there with us that whole time. And Daniel just clocked on. Where have you
Hey,
been?
Daniel. Yeah. Where is Daniel been? Yeah.
Where's Daniel been? All right. So
All
that's
right.
it.
Good
All
day
right.
and good night. We will see you hopefully Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. Central Time. Shalom, shalom. And one more.
Shalom, shalom.
Keep the people in Florida in your thoughts and prayers. And we have some people with United Israel that are there, and just we're just waiting on the results of that. So keep them in your prayer. See you later.
Bye bye.